Well, as I said before, the word for the day is justification. You heard it a couple of times in that lesson from Paul. It's what Paul is at the heart of what Paul is trying to communicate at this central, pivotal point in the letter to the Romans. But I don't think that it's a word that really has much meaning or relevance for most of us. It's not a word that we situate in the midst of our lives. It's not a word that we use at the dinner table or while running errands or while doing the gardening. When was the last time you used the word justification in a text message? Right, like never. For one thing, it's too long. Our gospel lesson this morning is from the last section of John chapter 8. In the first section of John 8, the scribes and Pharisees are looking for a way to get a leg up on Jesus, to paint him into a theological corner, to get him into the kind of trouble that will at the very least discredit him. And so in that story, we didn't read it this morning, but it's at the beginning of the chapter. The scribes and Pharisees bring out an adulterous woman who was caught in the act, and they believed that the law of Moses gave the right for them to stone her. And so they have this woman in the middle of them, and they bring Jesus along and say, "Okay, Jesus, what's it going to be? What do you say?" And to be very clear, the story is about neither the woman nor adultery. The woman is a prop for the ongoing struggle between the religious leaders and Jesus. The scribes and Pharisees are uncomfortable, to say the very least, with Jesus and his message of a new kingdom, of God's intention to create a new people, a people where the center will be made up of the poor and the powerless. And so the Pharisees and the scribes' response to Jesus is to puff themselves up, to prove that they know the law better than Jesus. And their justification lies in their ability to execute the law. It relies on their intellect and their wit and their power and their ability to name drop. Let's also be clear that trying to justify oneself is not the unique claim of first century religious leaders. For instance, I leave my shoes by the foot of the stairs. A family member comes down the stairs, doesn't see my shoes, and nearly does a faceplant on the floor. When the family member points out my lack of concern for anyone else in the house, I respond, "But I didn't mean for you to trip," as if my intentions have any relevance, justifying myself by deflecting responsibility. Or I miss an important appointment. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I've been so busy." As if my busyness is of any relevance, justifying myself by making excuses. When I first got interested in the work to heal the racial divide in the church and in our country, I went to an African-American pastoral colleague, and I asked her to bring some of her people to our church to help us understand racism. She looked at me firmly and she said, "That's not my job, and it's not our job. You go do your work, and then you come back and talk to me." I was offended. "What do you mean?" I thought. "Aren't we supposed to do this work together?" So I went home, and I went on a Facebook rant, rebuffing my colleague for her harsh response, indignant because I believed I was right. And there, very publicly on Facebook, it all came back to me. You go do your work first. And still not convinced, sometimes it takes me a while to learn my lesson, still not convinced, because I'm a smart guy and I have good intentions, I began to read, and I discovered that they were right all along. Go do your own work. You see, the point is, self-justification can be very powerful. And we even do it in our relationship with God. What do you expect, God? I'm only human. If I don't look out for number one, nobody else is going to. And how often have I seen someone gets upset at something going on at church and somehow justify deciding not to go or not to participate? Self-justification can be a powerful thing. And let me tell you, we have perfected the art. Proving, blaming, name-dropping, excusing, working harder, hiding, making excuses, trusting in our ability to at least not be as bad as the guy next door. I know what it's like to be stuck in that iron-barred jail cell of self-justification. All those times when I have botched it up good and then tried to defend, prove, or justify myself. And just maybe you know that prison too. Today, dear church, Jesus comes. He comes to us and calls us sons and daughters. Jesus comes and whispers into our ears, "The truth shall make you free." He comes despite our determination to be enslaved to self-justification. And the message of freedom that Jesus comes to bring us is the real Reformation that we celebrate today. God has come to us. God has chosen to remold us and reshape us and replace our hearts of stone with hearts of flesh. God is determined to transform us from slaves stuck in the chains of self-justification to sons and daughters. From people who rear up and justify ourselves when we feel under attack to people who can be still, like the psalm says, and let God do the justifying. And you see, this is precisely what Jesus has done in his death and resurrection. Jesus' faithfulness lines up our lives with the glory and righteousness that God intends for every human person. In Jesus' cruel death and resurrection, God has provided a way for us from slavery to freedom, from darkness to light, from death to life. And because of this life-giving gospel, we are free to tell the truth about ourselves. Because we know that the truth will set us free. Yeah, I botched it. Yeah, I'm broken. Yes, I'm fearful. Yes, I'm lost. Yes, I need help. And yes, God still loves me. God still wants me to have life. God still makes me God's own. We show up at God's front door unjustified, and then we let God call the shots about whether we're okay or not. And every time God will say, "You are okay. I love you." And we trust the mark and the seal of our baptism to give us the confidence that we need, that we do have a place in God's household. This is the Reformation gospel. And when this Reformation gospel settles into us, we look like what we hear in today's psalm. The earth can be shaking, and often it feels like it does. Everything can be upended, which seems to happen. And instead of justifying ourselves or despairing or taking matters into our own hands, we sit still in the almighty fortress of Christ's love, which secures us, justifies us, and makes us okay even when we don't feel okay. this holy habitation of God does not wall us off, but secures us so that we can engage more deeply the broken world around us. We now have courage to engage the world's brokenness and speak to the world that Reformation truth. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. So today, we put justification back in God's hands, and we see again what miracles God can do.